So I have been reading up on questions atheists have for Christians. I am attempting to answer as many as I can. So the next question is this: if God knows everything, then how do we have free will? The argument seems to be determinism. The doctrine that all events, including human action, are ultimately determined by causes regarded as external to the will. Some philosophers have taken determinism to imply that individual human beings have no free will and cannot be held morally responsible for their actions. First of all, what exactly is free will? Free will is the power or capacity to make choices and control actions independently of external coercion or prior physical events. It implies that you are the ultimate author of your decisions and hold moral responsibility for your behavior. At its most basic level, free will means acting voluntarily and making your own choices without being forced or coerced by someone else. For example, deciding what to eat or which route to take to work are considered acts of free will in everyday life. To be honest, I have never really understood this argument. I fail to see how God, knowing what choices you make, somehow removes your ability to make those choices. If you take a test, would the teacher, knowing you are not going to study for the test and get an F, somehow remove your ability to be lazy and not study? Unless the teacher sits over your shoulder and forces you to get a good grade. Even if God talked to you and tried to get you to study for the test, unless he forced you to do so, you would still retain your free will. In addition, I would argue that even if God intervened directly in something you were trying to do and stopped you, that may not actually violate the concept of free will. If a man were to attempt to sexually assault a woman, and a police officer arrived on the scene and shot him while he was attempting the act, was the rapist's free will violated because the police officer stopped him? When talking about the concept of free will, we also have to understand that other people also have free will. The police officer's free will in this scenario is to stop the man from committing sexual assault. Even if the officer kills a person in the act of committing a crime, that person's free will is still intact, as they made the decision to commit a crime. The first efficient cause is the uncaused cause of existence in all things. This means that while all things receive their existence from him, he receives his existence from nothing outside himself. He simply is. It follows from this concept that he must also be immutable, since he is existence, and must therefore be pure act, having no potentiality. His immutability reveals his eternity. God must be eternal, since time is a measurement of change, and it is now known that he is unchanging. This means that Aquinas is correct in his conclusion that God perfectly possesses all that is past, present, and future simultaneously whole in himself. From this understanding of God's eternity, it naturally follows that he infallibly knows all, since he experiences everything as it was, is, and will be at once. Possessing all of time at once, he knows without fault what man will do because it is happening in him at all moments. Therefore, reason leads to the conclusion that God's omniscience does not impede or restrict man's free will. Just because God knows what is going to happen does not mean he determined it to be so. God is not bound by time and sees the past, present, and even future events. God 5 does not write down what you're going to do on a piece of paper and force you to do so. He knows all the possible choices and outcomes of your choices. Dr. Michael Heiser taught that human free will is inextricably linked to being made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. He argued that genuine freedom is a necessary, communicable attribute of God, meaning humanity cannot truly reflect his image if our choices are strictly predetermined. Humans must have the capacity to choose between different courses of action. Without this freedom, concepts like love, moral responsibility, and self-sacrifice cease to exist. He defined evil as a direct consequence of free will being perverted by rebellion. God permitted the potential for evil rather than making humans robots, because having actual imagers was preferable to the alternative, even considering the cost. Dr. Michael Heiser applied the concept of free will to the Old Testament by demonstrating that both human and spiritual beings possess genuine volition, and their choices directly shape cosmic history. Rather than viewing the Old Testament as a script rigidly predetermined by God, Heiser argued that it is a narrative of dynamic, real-time collaboration and rebellion. Heiser argued that the Old Testament outlines three cosmic crises, all driven by the misuse of free will by imagers, both human and divine. The Fall, Genesis chapter 3. Humanity exercised free will to rebel, choosing self-will over God's design. Heiser noted that even being in the direct presence of God in Eden was no guarantee that a free will being wouldn't stray. The sin of the Watchers, Genesis 6. Heiser stressed that the sons of God, Elohim, possessed free will. They deliberately chose to cross boundaries and corrupt humanity, showing that heavenly beings are not pre-programmed robots. The Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. Humanity collectively used its volition to reject God's command to fill the earth. In Heiser's flagship work, The Unseen Realm, he highlighted how God governs the cosmos through a celestial bureaucracy. Real delegation. God does not simply issue commands to mindless puppets. According to passages like 1 Kings 22:19-23, God holds council meetings where he allows spiritual beings to pitch ideas and use their own volition to execute his decrees. The Deuteronomy 32 worldview. At Babel, God disinherited the nations and assigned them to lesser Elohim. Deuteronomy 32:8-9. These gods used their free will to rebel, demanding worship and ruling corruptly, which led to God's judgment against them in Psalm 82. To prove that the Old Testament rejects hard determinism, Heiser frequently cited the story of David at Keilah in 1 Samuel 23:1-13. David asked God if King Saul would come to destroy the city, and if the citizens of Keilah would betray him. God answered yes to both. Armed with this information, David used his free will to flee, and the betrayal never actually happened. The logic, Heiser used this to show that God's foreknowledge includes all possible outcomes what would happen under specific conditions, not just a singular, unalterable timeline. Human choices actively alter the path taken. Covenant election is not saved versus damned. Heiser strongly challenged the idea that Old Testament election meant individual predestination to heaven or hell. He argued that in the Old Testament, being elect simply meant being a citizen of the nation of Israel, the people group God chose to preserve his covenant. Individual Israelites still had to exercise personal free will to remain faithful to Yahweh. They could and often did commit apostasy and forfeit the benefits of the covenant through their choices. Ultimately, Heiser explained that God predestines the endpoints of history, but not every individual event along the way. God's sovereignty is so immense that he does not need to micromanage or dictate every human or angelic action. Instead, he seamlessly weaves their free choices and even their evil acts into his ultimate victory. If humans do not have free will, then it would not be fair for God to punish them. Also, it is not fair for our criminal justice system to punish people for crimes if they have no choice but to commit crimes. Ultimately, while some atheists and some Christians say we do not have free will, they do not live their lives that way. How many of them are the victims of crime and report it to the police? How many of them have reported bad customer service to management or filed a lawsuit? If we believe people do not have free will, then we should not report or punish them for any crime. We also should not be filing lawsuits in court or complaining about bad service, as these people have no choice. but to behave in the manner that they do. If there is no free will, why bother with trying to rehabilitate criminals? We as a society hold people accountable for their behavior as if they do have free will,